For those of you who are newer to the community or are worshiping here for the first time, you may have missed an incredible Father Abraham who was played by Angie Endo in Godspell last spring, as this story was told and shared in the context of this community and our larger community. The story of two men separated by a great chasm. Now, perhaps, like me, you've heard joke after joke or story after story about the rabbi and the Lutheran pastor and the Catholic priest who end up dying at the gate of St. Peter. And it can go on in many and various ways about what they didn't do or did do in this life. Or perhaps it's the doctor and the lawyer and the accountant. The list can go on, and we recognize that these stories about showing up at the gate of St. Peter, well, they really don't have a lot to say about St. Peter or even about heaven. But they do have an awful lot to say about how we live here, who we are, what we are to be about. And as we hear this story that is fixed in the other world, in the bosom of Abraham in Hades, it doesn't have a lot to say about heaven or the bosom of Abraham or Hades. But it has an awful lot to say about who we are and how we are living here today. As I was preparing for today, I read a wonderful story by a friend and colleague, John Stendahl, who is a pastor at Lutheran Church of the Newtons in Massachusetts. And John shares a story about how he went to visit a parishioner in the hospital, doing his good pastoral visitation, connecting with this individual. Now, this person had suffered some traumatic brain injuries and some various struggles in his life, and was in the mood to walk. So being a good and faithful pastor, John walked along with this individual as they poked their heads into each and every room to see who was there and what was happening. Finally, after visiting seemingly countless rooms, one after another, they landed in a large dining room. And John looked in and said, "No need to go in there. There's no one there." In that moment, a voice boomed from across the other side of the room. "What do you mean, no one's here?" said the janitor. There were two custodians in there working away in this dining room. In that moment, John's sense of pride and pastoral accomplishment in walking with this individual with his health issues turned into a deep red blush and a sense of deep failure. He had looked into this room and had not seen any other patients or people that they needed to check in on, and had completely missed the two individuals who were in there working away with their livelihood, saying simply, "We don't need to go in there. No one's in there." As we come to this story, I can't help but think about this rich man who became labeled as Dives or Dives in the biblical narrative that has been passed down through history. And how many times he walked by his own gate to get into his house and put on his rich robes, soft against the skin, and to eat sumptuously on delicious things, figs and olives, rich breads, sweet honey, wonderful milk. And he walked on by, perhaps not even noticing this one who was at the gate, Lazarus. Going right past because, well, no one's there. Or perhaps he was maybe even a little more generous or liberal than that, and would flick him a penny or a coin now and again and walk on by. What we need to realize is that here and now there is this great chasm that exists. A chasm between those who have and those who have not, at least in monetary or economic ways. And how easy it is to look past the other and not even recognize this chasm that separates us from one another, much less how we are called into relationship with our brothers and sisters. Both last week and this week continue to strike at the very heart of who we are as a people of faith, and the question of, are we comfortable with this challenge? When we hear again and again that the rich are getting richer. If you read the Star Tribune a week and a half ago, you saw that the top 10% in the United States have continued to grow. And the top 3% and the top 1% have grown significantly more. There is gap after gap. And the number of people who walk on by and say, don't worry, no one's there. And these numbers drive to the heart of who we are. If there is a household in our country that makes over $101,000 a year, that is the top 10%. $101,000 a year puts you in the top 10%. Coupled with that, if you make over $31,000 a year, it puts you in the top 1% globally. So as we have heard these stories over and over again about the 99% in the United States, I think about who we are in this larger global context. And I cannot let go of this story in which we are challenged to say, how are we going to not just walk on by, but rather be in relationship with one another? How are we going to care for our brothers and sisters and not just throw a penny or make sure that the scraps fall off the table, but to say, for you I have compassion and know that in faith I am called to journey with you. I didn't realize what George Robson was going to do when he came up here and he broke these chains of oppression. But as he moved down the line and held hands or put an arm around them, what an incredible witness. To say, not only do I want to break the system or change the way things are, but I want to be in relationship with you. I want to walk with you. That is a profound witness. And we like to kind of poo-poo those times where maybe we walk on by or ignore. But I also want to share a story that 13 of us heard yesterday morning as we as council and leadership came together to talk about race and racism and privilege.